Welcome to Cut the Crop, keeping you in the know about everything you grow. Researchers, growers and other interesting folk delivering insights and information on topics ranging from agronomy to profitability. Brought to you by the Foundation for Arable Research.
Hello and welcome to Cut the Crop. I'm Alison Stewart and I'm your host for this session. And today we have Ivan Lawrie from FAR, who is going to be talking to us about the biosecurity responses that he's been involved in. Welcome, Ivan.
Thank you, Alison.
So you've been pretty busy over the last couple of months dealing with two biosecurity responses, fall armyworm and blackgrass. And I think we'll focus on the fall army one today, although we will briefly mention the blackgrass. So let's start off and just give us a bit of an update on where we stand with fall armyworm, which is very specifically, targeted for our maize growers.
So both incursions are related to things that happened in the previous season. So with fall armyworm today, we've had 133 properties with findings of fall armyworm reported. That is not the number of individuals of fall armyworm that we found. We found many more than that. But these are 133 sites on which they were found. And those sites range from the north of the North Island right down to the west coast of the South Island, and a very recent find this week in North Canterbury as well.
Okay. Has it been a surprise to find it down in the South Island?
Not entirely, because the models have been telling us that the conditions are possible for fall armyworm to exist through the weather patterns and the temperature patterns that we're looking through the country. However, we were probably not that aware that there were such small pockets of frost-free areas in the west coast that are not traditional arable farmers who were growing maize in very small areas, and that's where we did find it. But for the modelers, it was not a surprise because it was possible through the graphs for that to happen.
So we've obviously got these detections, but what impact is it having on the crop?
Because it takes more than 3 generations for the populations of fall armyworm to build up and produce significant economic damage, we've probably not seen the impact that we have seen in other parts of the world where temperatures are warmer and those numbers get up and become more voracious as they move from crop to crop. At this stage, we have reached 3 generations in Northland, and that is obviously the warmest conditions that we've got in New Zealand. And we've had probably a handful of paddocks that have had a significant amount of damage, but that was controlled successfully with insecticides so far. So on this point, I want to say that there's no substitute for detecting fall armyworm very early in the crop, when the crop stage is 4 to 6 leaves and the caterpillars have not gone into the whorl. At that stage, effective control with insecticides is still really, really possible. And that's when you really get the maximum impact of your treatment.
So we're obviously in a response, and so we're operating under the GIA partnership. How far along are we in this response, and what's likely to happen in the future?
So we had always agreed that we would keep this response going until we determined whether eradication of the pest was feasible in New Zealand. Obviously, with the geographic distribution of fall armyworm now on both islands, that eradication is no longer possible, and we are closing the response within the next 60 days. And then we will pass into a period of long-term management where we will have plans in place and the research in place to start dealing with this pest and hopefully keeping it in check for the long term.
Yeah. So when we come out of response phase, we're no longer operating under the GIA partnership. And once we're in long-term management, it's sort of like the, transitioning to then the industry having to manage it.
That is correct, but there is a period in between in which we will continue to work with MPI and receive support from MPI to get through that period. Certainly the research programs that were undertaken during the response are ongoing and will continue to work right through until mid-year when the reports will come in on what the findings are. And so it's not going to be a stop and start situation. It'll be a soft transition.
Yeah. So obviously long-term management is something that our growers have had to do for many different pests and diseases. With fall armyworm, what is it going to look like? What options have the growers got available to them at the moment in order to be able to manage fall armyworm?
So there will be a range of approaches that growers need to take into account for the long-term management. The first one, I guess, and the most obvious one is the chemical control. And for that, we've already got one product on label, which is Sparta spinetorum, both for ground application and more recently for aerial application. But we don't want to rely on one chemical because of the resistance that fall armyworm has presented to chemicals throughout the world. So there are another 2 chemical products that could potentially be complementary to work in with spinetorum to control fall armyworm and used in rotation and sparsely and wisely. Hopefully will not create that resistance. But there are other encouraging things, and we really want to focus our attention on biocontrol agent, Cotesia, a parasitic wasp that is already present in New Zealand and has action on cosmopolitan armyworm, and for a corn earworm is already showing signs of being effective on fall armyworm. So we're very optimistic about that and want to explore that further.
And what about compatibility then with do the insecticides impact on the parasitoid or what?
So here's the importance of using insecticides that are as specific as possible and will have the least collateral damage on the populations of beneficials.
I mean, obviously there will be some research that needs to be done on fall armyworm, specifically related to how it operates in New Zealand. Are we going to be bringing out any grower resources over the next year for to help growers manage it?
So that is the aim. Research is already underway. I must say that the team with B3 at AgResearch has already been undertaking an enormous amount of work on fall armyworm throughout the past season. This will be complemented with some more specific and more applied research we need for tools for our growers. Amongst them, we hope to develop an online tool to predict the appearance of fall armyworm, much as we have for other pests and diseases online and far. And that will be done with our industry partners, Processed Vegetables New Zealand and Vegetables New Zealand, who are together with us on this response. We also hope to develop some clearer thresholds of economic damage specifically for New Zealand, as we've been using the ones from the international literature so far. Mm. So all of these things are working together, hopefully will produce a package that can allow growers to manage this pest more effectively in the future.
I guess it's one of those situations where, if you have to have a biosecurity incursion that can't be eradicated, having options to effectively control it is great. And I think fall armyworm is in that space, but that's probably not the case for something like blackgrass, which is the other biosecurity response that you've been involved in. So can you give us just a short update on what's happening there?
So yes, a completely different situation, because with blackgrass, yes, it is something that is restricted to a small amount of paddocks, clearly identified the origin and clearly identified the potential dispersal. So we are dealing that with a serious view of eradication and always looking to contain the spread of blackgrass. So they're very different situations. One of them is widespread and one of them is very, very regionally contained.
And if we didn't contain it and it did spread, the impact that blackgrass would have on cereal crops in particular would be quite devastating.
Following what's been going on in the UK and in continental Europe with blackgrass, we've always had it on our radar as the weed that could potentially be more devastating to the arable rotation that we conduct, especially in places like Canterbury.
So you're obviously, the focus is we want to eradicate this. Are you hopeful that the processes that we've got in place, that we've got a programme of work that is going to ultimately lead to eradication?
We have a programme of work that will hopefully lead to eradication. This is not the first time we're dealing with a blackgrass incursion in New Zealand. And as we trade with the world, and a large part of our $300 million export of seeds and arable crops is directly dependent on imports, we know that from time to time we will be dealing with this or other incursions related to weeds coming in, contaminating samples. It's a very good net that we've got in place, but it's not impregnable. Sometimes things will get through and we just have to deal with them.
I guess it just reiterates why it's so important that FAR, and as part of SGRR, has signed up to the GIA, because we need to have, some involvement in being able to address and deal and make decisions about how to manage these biosecurity incursions. I guess the flip side to that is, of course, that as part of GIA, the industry is going to have to contribute to some of the costs. And so that is something that, we're going to have to make our industry probably more aware of. We have mentioned it repeatedly over the last 3 or 4 years, but, I guess when push comes to shove, it's not until you actually have to go out to enact a biosecurity levy that the growers really understand what it's all about.
Yes, that's right. And I'll just explain that we operate here not as FAR, but as Seed and Grain Readiness and Response, which is a partnership with the other arable sector organizations. And within that, we sign up to GIA, and it involves other industries that are potential beneficiaries of an incursion. So it's quite complex. And yes, there is cost. Indeed, there's cost involved, especially when farmers have to be compensated for the loss of crops that have to be removed or disposed of. So that is what we're currently facing at the moment. But that is the cost of protecting our industry to be able to continue to export and to operate efficiently.
And I guess that's what we went through with pea weevil as well. The fact that, we, in order to protect everyone being able to grow peas, we had to shut down, pea growing in a certain region, and we had to compensate those growers.
Yes. And just to explain what the current situation is with blackgrass, and of course there's confidentiality involved around disclosure of who and where those properties are. We are dealing with an incursion of 2 paddocks in the whole of New Zealand this season, and 4 paddocks last year. So this is not a widespread infestation of blackgrass throughout Canterbury. It's very, very pinpointed. We know where they are. The crops have been disposed of and destroyed to minimize the risk. So we think that we're working on a very, very low risk pattern, but we don't want to take any risks either.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know that both you and our new biosecurity officer, Ashley, that you've been putting a lot of time and effort into this over the last 3 or 4 months. So I think the growers should absolutely recognise all the hard work that you've been, I guess, putting in to support them and their ability to continue to grow. So thank you very much, Ivan, for that update. And listeners, thank you very much, and have a safe day on the farm.
Thanks for tuning in to Cut the Crop, presented to you by FAR. If you'd like to know more about any of the topics discussed or have any suggestions for future topics, go to www.cutthecrop.co.nz.